So let's talk about why this growing season sucked. Hey guys, my name is Jackie and welcome to The Wandering Oak. If you've been here before, welcome back, and if you're new here, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So I live in Zone 6 in Northeast Ohio with my husband. We have 2 dogs, a cat, and 6 chickens. We live just a walk away from Lake Erie, and our growing season is between April 28th and October 27th, giving us 181 days to grow. We are suburban homesteaders. We live on just under a quarter of an acre, and we are always trying to push the envelope with how much we can get out of our tiny little area. And so now that I've introduced myself, I want to talk to you today about how I absolutely sabotaged my spring and summer garden. And I also want to talk about things that I'm doing to rectify the situation so I hopefully have a better fall garden. It's been a really tough year for a lot of gardeners, not just throughout the US, but throughout the world. There's been excessive heat and drought and floods and contaminated soil, you name it. But that's not what I dealt with. What I dealt with was lack of experience and my own doing. So what happened with my garden is a combination of 3 things that just kind of all melded together to create the perfect storm to make nothing grow. I garden in the ground and in raised beds and vertically. I basically garden any way that I can. And what I really had problems with this year was in-ground gardening. So this is our first year that we really focused on food production. In years past, I've always been more of an ornamental grower with perennials and shrubs and things like that. But this year, I was hoping to grow most of our food for next year. Nay, that is not the case. Do not expect to jump in your first gardening year and expect that you're going to get these massive harvests, because gardening is a science and an art, and it takes finesse and experience, and I don't want you to give up if you have also had some failures, because I guarantee no matter how many failures you've had, you've probably had at least some kind of success, plus you are just that much more equipped on what not to do for next year. And that's kind of the attitude I'm taking with this, is just knowing how to proceed better next year. And we still have the fall garden, so not all is lost for this year. The 3 things that I mentioned that really set me up for failure this year, I'll talk about each one of them a little more in depth, but they are starting off with crummy soil, the type of mulch I used, and not fertilizing enough. And what all of this comes down to is nutrients. There was not enough nutrients in my soil. And it wasn't just a combination of I started out with poor soil and I also didn't fertilize, but what really threw it all off was the mulch. So let's first talk about the type of soil that I have, native soil in my yard. So my house is 80 years old, or 82 years old at this point, and for as far as I know, there's never been any gardens here. It has just been a suburban plot of land with grass. And so the biodiversity is definitely not as strong as it could be. It's just rather crummy soil. I'll dig up some holes and they will be nothing but clay, and then I'll go over to another area and there's not nearly as much clay. So just very inconsistent soil, very poor soil that has not a good layer of topsoil on top of it. But besides from that, I had always been under the impression that mulch was good for your garden. Like the wood chip mulch, we actually bought a big truck of it from a local nursery or a local landscaping company, and I had been spreading it all over my beds because mulch looks tidy. I didn't use anything that had dyes. It was just a natural wood chip. It makes your garden beds look so neat and tidy. It is a weed suppressant. And it also stops the nutrients that is in your soil from being kind of like bleached out by the sun. And while it does all of these things, it is more detrimental than beneficial from what I found this year. And so I want you to think about this in composting elements. Your wood chips are your carbon. And the other thing that a compost pile needs is nitrogen. And what do plants need to produce? Nitrogen. When I put this mulch on my beds, it robbed all of the plants from nitrogen in the soil. So when I planted bean crops, they grew up and they were fine, but they were turning so incredibly yellow. Classic sign of nitrogen deficiency. And so I hit them with some fertilizer, and after a few weeks they started to bounce back. So I will definitely not be using mulch again. If you want to put some kind of a mulch over your soil, I recommend using compost. That is what I'm going to do. It's good for your soil, it feeds your soil, it builds your soil health. Whereas mulch, it's great for looking nice, and it might work well for perennials, but not for annuals, not for food crops. Just don't do it. You will regret it. When it comes to perennials and shrubs, they can handle it. They're more established. They don't take as much of the same types of nutrients that food crops do, and they have deeper root systems. And so they are accessing the nutrients far below where any of your annual produce is. And the third thing that I did wrong this year is I am notoriously bad for fertilizing. I just don't have fertilizing on my radar. It's just not something that I've ever prioritized. And when it comes to perennials and shrubs, which is what I'm primarily used to, it doesn't matter so much if you fertilize them. But let me tell you, if you do nothing else for the health of your garden, put them on a fertilizing schedule. You can use organic fertilizer, you can use compost teas. I've been using the Espoma organic tomato liquid fertilizer that I just put in my watering can and fill it up with water and water like normal. And we also just started a fish tank that when we do water changes, we are going to use that as fertilizer for our garden. And also, composting on any level, even if it's in like a 5-gallon bucket compost thing, you can take it and you can make compost teas and really use it to your advantage and spread it all over your garden. So that is 3 different fertilizing options, but we are also just going to really focus on soil health and adding in compost and those good things naturally. And so we really just need to work on the biodiversity in our soil in order for our plants to be healthy. And so now, while it may seem like all is lost, it is not. It is time actually to start planting, at least for me, planting our fall gardens. As of today, which is August 2nd, I currently have 86 more days of my growing season. So I have 3 different categories that I can still be planting right now. The first category is quick turnaround warm weather crops. And those are things that mature in, say, 65 days. There are some cucumbers that you can still plant right now. Any beans that have a quick turnaround, because there's still enough warm weather to get you through to be able to harvest something off of those plants. It's just a good idea that when you're looking at those maturity days that you give them an extra week or 2. As the days get shorter, they are going to take longer. So those 65-day items that will come to fruition might take 70 or 80 days, but that's still within my 86-day window that I have. And there's no guarantee that I'm going to get a frost on October 27th. It could come sooner, it could come later. That's just kind of a gamble. But it is definitely still worth it to plant things if you have the time to do so. Don't count yourself out for this season yet. And then the second category of things that you can be planting right now is everything that you would plant for your fall garden. These are things that are cold hardy, frost tolerant, that actually do better as they mature into the colder weather. So these are things like carrots and lettuce, broccoli, cabbage, all kinds of the brassicas, kale, spinach. Those types of things are fantastic to be planting right now. So I will definitely be loading my garden full of those, ripping on a lot of things that are worse for wears, and just seeing what I can get out of those. It's not too late. It's actually the time to be doing that, at least in my area. That just depends on, a lot of those seed packets say to plant them like 10 to 12 weeks, direct sow them before your first frost. So you'll just have to find out your first frost and then count back however many weeks that is, and that's when you should be planting your fall garden. Some of you should already have your fall garden in. Some of you have a few more weeks still before you have to put in your stuff. And the third category that we're going to talk about is things that you're going to overwinter. The most common one in this category is garlic. You usually plant garlic around October. Those overwinter and then start growing in the spring. I've never personally overwintered potatoes or onions, but I do hear people say you can do that as well. But I will definitely be trying garlic again, and this time in a raised bed without mulch on top of it and fertilizing more. So those are 3 categories you can still be planting right now, and 3 things that really made my gardening season really difficult this year. I haven't given up hope. I've learned a ton this year. I am ready to try again with the fall garden, and I am ready to try again next year and implement what I've learned. And stay tuned, because the next video that I'm going to come out with is everything, all the varieties that I'm going to be putting in my fall garden. So subscribe to my channel if you want to see that. I've got some pretty good stuff. And we'll just go over talking about the different varieties. It'll be a super fun, laid-back video. Let me know in the comments below what you've struggled with this year and what's done really well. For me, last year squash did horrible, and squash is doing great for me this year. So not everything has done horrible. The squash and the peppers, excellent this year for me. Thank you guys for joining me in today's video, and I hope to see you again in the next one. Bye.